A single structure standing in the middle of the woods. It was made of wood that had started to rot from outside. The face of the cabin was riddled with graffiti and crude phrases. I was at the right place. I scanned the cabin, and I could see two human beings. Their heartbeats were surprisingly slow and relaxed, a contrast to the two girls in the woods. I walked to the open front door. I was met with a candle, lying a single wooden table in the middle of the room, and I could see traces of blood on the table and the floor. At the end of the table sat a young blonde boy holding a knife in one hand and a lighter in his other. He couldn't be more than 16, but he had a cold, dead stare. He looked straight into my eyes, unflinching. Behind him, I could barely make out the silhouette of a larger gentleman, who slowly walked out of the shadows and put his hand on his young compatriot's shoulder. This man wore a torn gray crew-neck t-shirt and a pair of charcoal slacks. He was also barefoot. He had a long, scruffy beard that matched his dry, flaky hair, and blue eyes that seemed to belong to someone else. They were a contrast to everything else about him. He smiled at me and asked me if the girl had sold him out. I pretended like I didn't know what he was talking about. He giggled to himself and grabbed the knife from his teenage sidekick. He then stroked the teenager's hair and told him to go home. The boy tried to protest as he was trying to prove his loyalty to his master. The man just coldly told him to go home. He stood up grudgingly and walked by me and disappeared into the woods. The man sat down on the chair where the boy sat. Then he stretched out his arm and pointed to the chair nearest to me with the knife. I refused to sit down. He jammed the knife on the table and insisted that I take a seat. He was clearly high on something. It was clear that he wanted to tell me something, so I played along. I took a seat and stared at him from across the table. He asked me if I was here to arrest him. I told him I had no such authority. I then told him that I was just here to make sure he didn't hurt any more kids. This seemed to anger him as he banged his fist on the table. He told me that he was there to give these teenagers love, a love that their parents failed to give them. He said he wanted to give them freedom from what he referred to as the Matrix. What he wanted was a liberation for all young people around the country, a country in his eyes that had failed them and fed them lies and a false sense of safety and comfort. He believed that there was a world beyond living in a quiet little town and pretending that life could ever be so simple. He then told me that there was no such thing as a safe space. Every place and community had its own demon, and pretending that you can hide from hell anywhere was a fool's dream. Even though he had his delusions, and he was hurting these kids in a strange way, he made sense. At least to me. It felt like he was talking to me. He stood up and asked me if I really believed that this town was free of its own demons. I didn't answer him. He picked up the knife and told me a story of a young boy who grew up in this town with his brother. This boy's father was the mayor of the town. Everyone loved the mayor and held him up in high esteem. Everyone would always say that this mayor embodied love. Some would even say that he was love. His family adored him very much. He loved his wife and kids, and it seemed he would do anything for them. Anyway, one day the mayor's youngest son realized his mother had been missing for a week, and his father kept telling the boys that she was on vacation. Of course, they had no reason to doubt him, so they lived in bliss and waited their mother's return. One night, this young boy woke up to the sounds of shoveling outside the window. Next to his father lay a black plastic bag with what seemed to be brunette hair sticking out. That was the night his father buried his mother. It would take the boy years to realize what had happened, and he was 16 when he decided he would report his father to the liaison office. The office investigated and dug up the backyard. After 2 hours, they finally found the body. The boy was both happy and sad, but at least his mother's disappearance was finally solved, and his father would go to prison, or so he thought. His father never went to prison, and all signs of his father's crime were wiped, and the town went back to normal. This cover-up messed with the kid's head, and he knew he couldn't live with his father anymore. So, he ran away into the woods and found an old cabin where he would hide out for years, surviving from hunting deer and becoming self-sufficient. Obviously, this boy was the founder himself. His past had led him down a dark path, and when he spoke, I could see that young boy in his eyes. He was no doubt a monster who had killed a child, but I understood how someone could be led down such a dark path. I could hear the liaison office heading in our direction in the woods. There was nothing left for me in Ravenswood, so I walked off and flew away. It was time for me to go home. My real home. With all I had seen and learned from New Haven, I finally understood what I needed. I couldn't hide from my trauma anymore. I had to move along with my life. To be honest, I didn't find peace in hiding and sheltering myself. I found peace in the small conversations and the people I helped. I even got it deep inside into the mind of broken souls. Souls more broken than my own. People who had let life turn them into monsters. I had found myself sympathizing with psychopaths and murderers and having disdain for those who were supposed to be the good guys. All this time I wanted to know how it would be to be human. But what I didn't realize was that I was human all along. Everyone is walking around with their own traumas, but in the end, we have to choose whether they make us into a beacon for others or into lost souls that will eventually hurt and lead people astray. I hope you will find your light and you will be lost no more. As for me, I was lost. Now I am found. That makes me the prodigal daughter.